Evicting a tenant can seem like a complicated process, but in this video, we'll quickly explain the eviction laws in Missouri and outline some simple steps that landlords can take to initiate an eviction. In this video, we'll talk about what the eviction process looks like, Missouri laws that determine how evictions are handled, and how to legally remove a non-compliant tenant from a property. And be sure to watch to the end of this video to find a link to a fillable eviction notice. First, what is an eviction? Eviction is the legal process required for removing a tenant. It's illegal for a landlord to change locks on a property or physically remove a tenant from that property. This is sometimes called a self-help eviction. If the tenant refuses to leave after violating the terms of a lease agreement, a landlord must seek an eviction from the court. Note that this is different from the simple termination of a lease. A landlord can opt not to renew a lease after a specified term has ended. There is no need to involve a court in this process. In Missouri, if a tenant fails to pay rent or breaches the terms of a lease in some other way, the landlord can issue what's known as a notice to quit. There are several versions of this form, and each applies to a specific situation. The first is the notice to quit for non-payment, which is also known as a demand for rent in Missouri. This form is used when a tenant fails to pay rent, and it warns the tenant to either pay or face immediate eviction. In many states, there is a set number of days that must pass before the landlord can bring an action, but in Missouri, the eviction process can be initiated immediately. State law is less strict with breaches of a lease agreement that aren't related to the payment of rent. These require a form called a 10-day notice to quit for non-compliance. Upon receiving this notice, the tenant must either fix the problem identified in the notice or face eviction. An example of a fixable breach is housing an unauthorized pet. There's also another form known as a 30-day notice to quit, which is used to end a month-to-month tenancy. Receiving this notice indicates to tenants that their lease will not be renewed and they have 30 days to move out. If the tenant does not comply with the terms of the notice to quit, the landlord is authorized to bring an eviction action. This begins with the filing of a form called a Petition for Rent and Possession in the Circuit Court of the county where the property is located. It's worth noting that in Missouri, clerks of the court cannot help with the preparation of the forms. When someone files an action without an attorney, the court assumes that the person knows the procedures and rules. The petition must be signed in the presence of a notary public, and the fee to file it is $50. A copy of the petition must also be served on the tenant either by a process server or the court. If the landlord prefers for the court to serve the documents, then a motion for order to serve or post must be filled out and filed. The court will mail out a notice of the court date and time. Both parties must attend the hearing, which will determine whether or not the tenant agrees with the complaint. If the tenant does not appear in court, the tenant will enter a default judgment, which means that the court will rule in the landlord's favor. When the court issues a judgment, the tenant has 10 days to appeal it. If the tenant disputes the proceeding, the judge will set a trial date. If the court rules that the property should be returned to the landlord and the tenant refuses to move out, the landlord can apply for what's known as a writ of possession. Each circuit court has its own version of this form, and once signed, it authorizes a sheriff to remove the tenant and the tenant's possessions from the property. Eviction can be a complicated and challenging process, but from eviction notices to court documents, we've got everything that you need to get eviction proceedings going, and you can access it all at the link below. And don't forget to subscribe to find other helpful videos about topics in property law.